Hello, the day is finally here. Thor Ragnarok is finally out in cinemas. Unless you live in the US. Sorry, that really sucks. But I've seen it, I saw it this morning. This is my review. It's really funny. Surprise, surprise, an MCU film is funny, right? Not a big shock, but you kind of have to remember the first two Thor films were not the best at balancing humour and the comic bookiness that you expect from these films. Thankfully, Thor Ragnarok, with the help of director Taika Waititi, finds a much better balance, and it's just a lot funnier. People have been saying this is one of the funniest MCU films, and I would basically agree with that. I think it's not perhaps as funny as some people might want you to think, but there's a steady stream of one-liners, there's some really nice references to the exterior universe, and even the director's previous films. There's a really nice little joke there if you catch it. So yeah, this film will have you steadily laughing. It's not a quip fest in the same way that, say, Age of Ultron was, and it's maybe not, as rat-a-tat jokes like Guardians, but it's very consistent and they don't try too hard. Chris Hemsworth gives his best performance as Thor. It's fair to say Chris Hemsworth hasn't really been given a lot to do as Thor in these films, especially like the wider MCU as well as the Thor films, but this is definitely his best performance. He's given the most to do. He's clearly the most comfortable and confident in the role, and yeah, in terms of badassery, in terms of being funny, and even like the drama scenes, he pulls it off pretty damn well. It was great to watch him in this part and finally have a film that was worthy of the effort he puts into the part. It looks and sounds great. Now, some of the MCU films don't look that good. Like Thor 2, for instance, is just so fucking grey and drab and horrible. Ant-Man looks like a TV movie. The only really good-looking films, I think, in the MCU are the Guardians of the Galaxy films. Until now. Thor Ragnarok is a really nice-looking film. It's very crisp visually. But yeah, there's a lot of CGI in there, as you would expect, but it's done well. The world building is really nice. The set design, costume design, like it really pops visually. They clearly put a lot of effort into that. And it kind of enhances the film's like 80s retro style. And then on top of that, you've got a score from Devo's Mark Mothersbaugh. I'm going to get that name wrong. But the musical score is actually really distinctive, which is not something you can say about a lot of the MCU's films. Most of them are very workmanlike, and they're just very generic. Like the Doctor Strange score was just, in part, sounded like a rip-off of Michael Giacchino's own Star Trek score. And maybe apart from Alan Silvestri's Avengers theme, there's not a lot that you're going to remember. But the music here is really great. It's very distinctive. It's not like orchestral and operatic. It's more synthy, and yeah, it was a very good choice to bring a more left field talent on board for that. The terrific supporting cast. Now, to be fair, most of the MCU's films have pretty great casts, but they don't always use them that well. Thankfully here, for the most part, they do very well with what they have. Some parts are just small cameos, really, like Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange and Anthony Hopkins as Odin. And then you've got Jeff Goldblum as Grandmaster, really fantastic. Tessa Thompson, supporting role as Valkyrie. She's in the film a lot, maybe you shouldn't call it a supporting role, but she's great. And then there's other stuff that I just can't talk about because it's too spoilerific, but there are a lot of people in this film, let's just say that, and there are some really nice surprises that are going to get people talking over the next few days and weeks, especially when the film comes out in the US. But yes, there's a lot to like here. Like, they've ditched the actors that kind of maybe didn't work quite so well in the previous films, like Natalie Portman's Jane Foster. Darcy, I personally wasn't a fan. I know some people were. I liked Stellan Skarsgård, but this film didn't really need him, so it's very understandable that he's not around. Tom Hiddleston, really fantastic actually, while I think of it. He gives one of the best performances in the entire film. I thought he was great, and he again affirms that Loki is just one of the best characters in the whole of the MCU. It's a truly standalone film. Most of the MCU films have a certain debt to pay where they have to sort of pay lip service to the wider MCU, and considering that this is just 2 films removed from Infinity War, you would forgive it if there were some indulgences to kind of set that up. But not really, to be honest. This is a very standalone film. Sure, you have Thor meeting Doctor Strange, that's not a spoiler, but in terms of like post-credit scenes or like random interjections that clearly neon blinking cinematic universe, not really. The story is very self-contained, like to the point that maybe some people won't like that. it's almost like it doesn't really have much of an effect on the wider universe. But I liked that. It was nice to have this little confined exercise. There's threat, but it doesn't have anything to do with Thanos really at all. Korg steals the show. If you haven't been following the advertising, you might not even know that this character's in the film. The director himself, Taika Waititi, he plays a character called Korg, who I believe was from the comics. And here he's been sort of reimagined as like a grey-blue rock monster with a Kiwi accent, essentially. And I know some people don't like the voice, like hardcore fans won't like it, but I thought Korg was a great character. He's like a weaponsmith at the beginning. He's sorting out the weapons for Thor, and he wants to be a revolutionary to kind of overthrow Grandmaster. And Waititi's delivery is just so funny, and there's some really great one-liners he has throughout the film. There's one one-liner that I'm surprised they got away with it. It's especially if you're in the UK or you're Australian or Kiwi, the vernacular, you'll be surprised that they got away with it. Whereas maybe for America it might fly over their heads a little bit, but if you're a kid, you're not going to understand it anyway. But moving on, Korg, I would love it if he became some sort of MCU staple. He was fantastic. That character has way too much potential to just be in one movie. And now let's move on to the things that didn't work quite so well in Ragnarok. Not enough Hulk. If you followed the advertising for Ragnarok, which you probably did, you're expecting probably quite a lot of Hulk in this film, and it's kind of been described as like a buddy movie. But that isn't really the case. I was quite surprised. The Hulk doesn't actually show up for almost an hour. I looked at my watch. I think it was like 54 minutes or something before the Hulk actually appears on the screen. And when he's on screen, absolutely fantastic. But I think some people might be expecting a lot more of the big green guy. His screen time is actually not that much. He appears and then he's off screen for a while and then he appears again for the end part of the film. But if you're thinking this is going to be Hulk shows up about 35-40 minutes in and he is there for the rest of the film, you might be a bit underwhelmed. Some people say this is the best version of the Hulk. I don't agree with that, just because, I don't know, it didn't feel like there was quite enough there, but what was there was really good. I really wanted more. Cate Blanchett's underwhelming villain. Cate Blanchett is really good in this film as Hela, the main villain, but she doesn't quite escape the MCU curse, if you catch my drift, where most of the villains, they're okay, and some of them are not okay. Some of them are actually very bad. Malekith from Thor 2, Ronan from Guardians of the Galaxy, both atrocious villains. Most of them fall in this sort of mediocre middle, where the actor is great, but they're just not given that much material to work with, so they take a huge backseat to the protagonist of the piece. And this is definitely the case here. She doesn't show up for quite a while, and then, kind of like the Hulk, she's off screen loads. And though Blanchett is clearly having a shit ton of fun with the character, she's not particularly developed. Her motives are fairly routine, and she doesn't really get much to do other than just ham it up. And she looks great and everything. But no, she's not another Loki or another Zemo, for instance. I'd say like around the average, maybe slightly above average, but she needed more screen time to be fleshed out. So a bit of a disappointment, to be honest. The lack of emotional weight. This is, of course, a common criticism for the MCU. So many of their films just don't have that gravitas, that emotional weight that you want to pull you in. Now, I think the first Avengers had it with Coulson's death. I think Civil War had it with its hand-wringing about collateral damage and, these two factions facing off. But most of the MCU's films don't have it. Nothing really matters. There aren't stakes, or the quips get in the way. And most of these issues are true in Thor Ragnarok as well. Like, sometimes the film derails its own emotion with a quip, or the overall Ragnarok scenario isn't built up that well. I didn't really believe that it was going to happen. I didn't really care, because the characters didn't really seem to care. They seemed kind of more interested in cracking jokes, which is fun, but this film could have had that little extra on top that really made you care, that had the heart that the film is missing. Which is a shame, considering the amount of potentially emotional elements going on. Like Valkyrie's got her own story, and there's the brother relationship, Thor and Loki, and the potential destruction of their homeland. Like, these are really interesting things that could have paid off, but it's kind of flaccid in that department, to be honest. The exhausting third act. The final half an hour of this film is fun, don't get me wrong, it's enjoyable, but I've also got to say I was getting kind of worn out by the action. And I know that to some people that might seem like a silly complaint, but it's like it was too much of a muchness, if you know what I mean. Like, just so much CGI is thrown at the screen, and the action is kind of just serviceable. I didn't think much of it was particularly fantastic or stand out. So to kind of have to sit through this like just torrent of action, I was kind of worn out, and I was kind of wishing that there was more funny dialogue in the third act, because yeah, it throws it at you, and it's, you know, it's fine, but it's not anything more than that really. And finally, it's a little bit too long. Tying into my previous complaint, yeah, the film is not particularly long by MCU standards, but it's definitely longer than it needed to be. I remember a few months ago, Taika Waititi, he said the film was going to be the shortest MCU film to date. He said it was probably going to be around 100-ish minutes, but the final film is 130 minutes, so I don't know where that came from. This definitely feels like the sort of film that would have benefited from being a really quick sprint, if you know what I mean. There's definitely some sagging in the middle that could have just been sliced right out of the film, and it would have been less exhausting to sit through. Maybe the third act wouldn't have seemed quite so such a like bombardment of things. I don't know, but yeah, I think about 110 minutes would have been like the ideal number. So yeah, like most MCU films, it does run a little bit too long, gets a little bit self-indulgent, but I think most people will be like mostly okay with it. It's just could have been a little bit shorter. So that's my review of Thor Ragnarok. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to see more of this, please do like and subscribe. But until next time, I'll be here from dusk till dawn.